So I'm asking you these questions because, for the most part, where there's smoke, there's
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right, we're just going to give it a few more minutes for folks to trickle in here.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm running behind.
Oh, no worries, Tracy. We're just waiting for folks to come on in.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lloyd.
Hey, Jonathan. You're still at the beach. I'm not.
I'm always at the beach.
I will definitely agree to be on again because you.
Okay. Well, I think we've got everybody whom we are going to have today. So we'll just go ahead and get started. We do have a few folks who aren't going to be able to join us. Chris Tonis has had something come up, so he's not going to be available today. My name is Jonathan Crooms. I'm one of the HSAC members and the current chair of the Performance Management Subcommittee. We have a lot of new folks joining today. Today is kind of the official first new performance management subcommittee meeting of the new HSAC year. So I thought what would be good is if we could just go around and say our names, and then that way I know who all is here. We have 4 new liaisons. So let's start with, let's see here. We have a new member, Shay. Go ahead, Shay, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Shay. Shay Kennard. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I am excited to be here today. I work outside doing publishing and helping people, publish books, and I have a magazine here locally, and I work for Duke Energy. Other than that, that's me.
All right. Lloyd, why don't you introduce yourself as our staff support?
Good morning, everyone. Lloyd Schmeidler. I'm a senior community development analyst in the City of Durham's Community Development Department. Primary staff support to the committee, supported by Colin and Ruby and Annalea Hoberman, my colleague as well.
And then Colin, if you want to introduce yourself. I think Colin might have disappeared momentarily. I believe Ruby is also on the call here. Ruby, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Ruby Holmes. I'm the coordinator for the homeless team with community development.
Okay, and then we have Christy, who I believe is one of our new liaisons. Christy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Christy Page. I'm the Director of Client Services. I'm actually not a liaison for this subcommittee, but I am a proxy. I believe that our new member, Shantae Addison, just got word a couple minutes ago, so I'm not sure if she's gonna join us or not, but I will be representing for Shantae.
Okay,
Thank you.
Terrific. Colin, you're back. If you want to introduce yourself.
Sorry, I had a quick phone call that popped up. Colin Davis, I'm the manager of the homeless system for the City of Durham.
Okay, terrific. And Dr. Birch, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Angelo Birch. I'm the secretary for the HSAC.
All right. And KC, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I am Casey Buchanan. I respond to they, them pronouns, and I am the Director of Housing and Therapy Services at the LGBTQ Center of Durham. Happy to be here.
Okay. And Tracy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning. This is Tracy Stone-Dino. I'm with Alliance Health. I'm Director of Housing Assistance Programs. I oversee housing assistance programs for our permanent supportive housing efforts, as well as transitional housing across Durham, Wake, soon to be Mecklenburg County, but Orange, Cumberland, and Johnston counties. Thank you.
Okay. And Ricky, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Ricky Gardner. I am the Government Affairs and Compliance Manager for Housing for New Hope. I'm here today because old habits die hard, and I am just observing today. I'm not a liaison anymore, but I love you guys, so I'm here.
Excellent. Well, we're always glad to have you. And Hanalea, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Hanalea Hoberman. I'm a senior analyst with the City of Durham and the coordinated entry administrator for the continuum of care.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so I think we have gotten all the introductions. If we have a few other folks who come in, we'll just have them introduce as they come in. So I realize that there are, I think, at least 3 or 4 of us on the call today who have not seen the agenda, and do apologize that our new liaisons were sort of notified at the last minute. Since we have a lot of new members today, I'm going to kind of change up the agenda order. Normally what we do at the beginning is, of course, brief welcome. We would approve any minutes from any previous meetings. We don't have any minutes from the last meeting, at least at this point today, to approve, so we will skip past that. What I would like to do next is, before we maybe move into an orientation here with Lloyd, is we do need a secretary for our group, and I do have a candidate who has expressed interest, and that is Shay Kennard. It is an important job to be the secretary of this committee, taking the minutes and keeping records of everything that we do. Our last secretary, who was absolutely wonderful, Shayna Kerrigan, she just came off finishing her term as a liaison. So as the chair, I would love to put forth Shay's name for secretary of our group. Is there anybody else who would like to nominate themselves or another member of the group for secretary? I'm going to take that as a no. So here's what we do need to take a formal vote here. So if a member of the group would just kindly, who is not me, kindly make a motion that. So we have a motion from Dr. Birch to appoint Shay Kennard as our secretary. Could I get a second?
I second.
Okay. And so we have a second. Is there any further discussion?
Jonathan, I just wanted to mention, since the meetings right now are via Zoom, they're being recorded, would the transcript be able to assist her in capturing the notes and minutes from the meeting?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. These are public
Okay.
meetings and they're recorded. So so Shay would certainly have help, from that as well. And
Okay.
I believe Ruby is the one who initiates the recording. So yeah, that will be of great help. Okay, so hearing no other further discussion on this, if those who can vote would kindly put their vote into the chat. Yes, to approve Shay as secretary. No, if you do not wish to approve her. And if you need to abstain, you can put abstain. Okay, and liaisons, you can vote. I realize this is your first vote, but you do have voting rights. Okay. So I have what I can see, three yeses in here. So it looks like, Shay, you are officially our secretary. So thank you for being willing to step up and fill that role for us.
Woo-hoo. Thank you, guys. I'm really
right.
excited. Thank you.
Okay. So we do have something that we do need to vote on. We have a funding memo. I'm going to put that to the aside for the moment, given that we have so many new members, and really, I think it would be helpful to have an orientation. Lloyd and I had planned this together. So Lloyd, I'm going to turn it over to you to orient our new members here.
Very good. Thank you. Good morning again, everyone. I encourage everybody to, if you've not yet reviewed the responsibilities of the Performance Management Committee, to go to durhamcoc.org, and I think it's in the governance section. You'll find a copy of the COC governance charter. The current charter, I believe, was last approved and amended in September of 2019. And the Performance Management Committee is an official committee of the Durham Continuum of Care under the broader leadership of the Homeless Services Advisory Committee. And Section 8 of the governance charter establishes the responsibilities of the Performance Management Committee. I'm not going to read the entire roughly 1 page, but I'll read some of it to you. In the introduction, it says the purpose of the Performance Management Committee is to review and set standards for the delivery of homeless services and for data management related to homeless populations and services, to evaluate the implementation of COC policies and procedures, and to provide guidance to the HSAC regarding funding recommendations. There are subsequent paragraphs under that broad overview of the committee's responsibilities. One of the roles that we've been trying to get started this year is around performance standards and monitoring and updating the COC's various performance standards and to monitor subrecipient performance on those measures. So that's the first subparagraph, that the committee shall develop and oversee the implementation of a plan for consulting with state and local government emergency solutions grants, program recipients, and other COC members on the plan for reporting on and evaluating the performance of ESG and COC funding recipients and subrecipients. There's also a paragraph about implementation, that the committee shall, on at least an annual basis, it says, review, evaluate, and report to the full HSAC on the implementation of the COC's written standards for organizational members designated as homeless service providers or funders. So that's an important responsibility as well. We're also responsible, the committee is also responsible for evaluating outcomes of projects. Again, part of implementation. Concerning HMIS, the committee shall ensure consistent participation in the homeless management information system of recipients and subrecipients of public funds used to address homelessness, and ensure that the HMIS is administered in compliance with HUD's requirements. The committee is also responsible for approving any proposed grant agreement amendments before any applicant submits such a request for an amendment to HUD. This concerns particularly COC grantees who have a grant agreement between their organization and HUD for implementing a COC funded project. If they desire an amendment to an existing grant agreement, they are to get approval for that grant amendment from this committee prior to conversing or dialoguing with HUD about the amendment. And then finally, and related to some of the committee's work this morning, is that the committee shall review and recommend to the HSAC continuum of care and emergency solutions grant funding decisions prior to such recommendations being submitted to the department and to the HSAC. So that's a brief overview of the committee's responsibilities as they are described in the COC governance charter.
So basically, and I'll just sort of add in my own little piece here, is that, we do mainly, I'd say 2 to 3 things. One is that we try to help our overall COC, our continuum of care, with figuring out how do we measure how well our performances or our projects are performing when it comes to providing services to our homeless residents. And we do that a couple different ways. I mean, we take our guidance from a lot of it from HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department of the U.S. government, because a lot of the funding comes from there. And they have certain standards that they want homeless projects to meet in order to receive funding. We also, as our own little community here in Durham, have the ability to, set some standards according to what makes sense for this particular community, who we are, our own population, and what our own unique needs are for our homeless residents. And once we have those standards in place, which I guess we probably have had them, some form of them in place really since I think HSAC came around years ago, we also periodically use those standards then to evaluate the projects and say use the data that we have available that the projects provide, that you heard Lloyd say the HMIS, the Homeless Management Information System. I don't want to assume that everybody knows what that is, but there is a database that homeless projects that receive funding from HUD are required to enter their information about the clients into the system, so that we know how many people we're serving, and we're keeping track of are people getting income, how long are they staying homeless. So that's where a lot of our data comes from when we do these evaluations. And we do a couple of them every year, and they tend to happen generally about the same time frame. You heard Lloyd mention the Emergency Solutions Grant funding. Some of you may already know about this, some may not, but there is a grant that comes through the state of North Carolina called the Emergency Solutions Grant, and usually late August, early September, that's usually when we are evaluating those applications. What we do is that we score them and make a recommendation for whom we think our continuum of care services should recommend for that funding. And that goes to the state of North Carolina, who makes the final decisions there. The other two evaluations we do what are called continuum of care semi-annual evaluations, where we just are kind of in the middle of the first one right now in the new year, and we'll do a second one about 6 months out. We do those evaluations for a pool of money that comes to our continuum of care, that our lead agency, which is the City of Durham Community Development Department, which Colin and Lloyd and Hanalea and Ruby all work for, and they help administer the competition, where we evaluate those projects twice a year and report back to the Homeless Services Advisory Committee. And so that's how we keep track of how well we're doing as a group. Lloyd or Colin or even Hanalea or Ruby, if there's anything else that I have missed or you all would like to add in. Hopefully I kind of covered everything there in layman's terms. Okay. Well, let me ask if anybody has any questions here about our overview.
Jonathan, I do have a question, if
Sure.
I could ask. Who scores the projects that you were explaining?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have a scoring committee. We certainly try to have folks within the performance management subcommittee be on those scoring panels as they're able to. Certainly everybody is a volunteer in this group. So, we know that we're not, that everybody has other priorities as well. So we look to folks from here to be on that panel. Sometimes there are folks who have conflicts of interest. Maybe their organization is up for funding, and so they can't be on that scoring panel. But we also look for folks outside, from the larger HSAC or even in the community to help with that. So, for example, this most recent scoring that we did, and we're going to present the results of that here in shortly. We had 4 members on the panel. We had myself, we had our former Secretary Shana Kerrigan, and then we had 2 folks from the community who had lived experience of homelessness on the scoring panel. And usually what we do is we try to have at least 3. We like anywhere from 3 to 5. And we have everybody score, and then we get together as a group and we talk through it, and then we come up with the final scores that way. So it is the people who score are those that step forward and say that I'd like to do this, and it's also folks who don't have any conflict of interest. And then one of the things that I think our leadership has, particularly our chair and our overall officers, have really tried to encourage, is to have more representation from people with lived homelessness, in the overall HSAC process, and also in the scoring. So we were very fortunate to have 2 folks from the community who had that experience, who were able and willing to score with us this time.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it.
You bet. So our meeting times are very predictable. We meet on the 2nd Thursday of every month, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. By virtual meeting while we're still in the midst of COVID. And we try to send out the agenda, any previous minutes, usually by the Friday before, so that you have some time to get that information. Sometimes that's not always possible given tight deadlines, but we try to get that out to you right away so that you have that information ahead of time. Of course, if at some point you're on a scoring panel, we do have to meet outside of that time to do the scoring work. But like I said, that's usually 3 times a year. The rest of the time, when we are not scoring, we are trying to address issues in our COC that affect the performance of projects. Our goal is to not only to evaluate how we're doing, but it's to help our overall COC, help our projects perform better and perform to the best of their ability. We all know that working with homeless residents is it's a challenging work because many of our residents, their problems or their issues that are contributing to their homelessness are so complicated. So we know it's challenging, and we not only want to set good measures in place, but we want to address things that affect performance. And so that's really what we're here to do. What other questions do we have? All right, everything is just crystal clear. I love it. Well, you know what? Feel free to ask questions as you go along. We don't want to do the old fire hydrant effect where we throw too much information at you at once. But feel free to ask questions. From my perspective as a chair, I try to, create an environment where people can feel comfortable, talking, raising issues, discussing challenging things. So, from my perspective, questions and people's thoughts and concerns are always welcome. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and we'll go ahead and move to the next piece. Lloyd, could you pull up the funding memo here? We'll go ahead and we'll look at this. This piece we do need to go ahead and take up because it does require a vote. So Lloyd, I'll turn that over to you, and we'll present this to the group. We do apologize, again, to our new liaisons. We notified here at the last minute that we've got a meeting today, and so unfortunately you will not have seen this. So we do apologize for that. Once we get settled in here with our communication with our new members that shouldn't happen again. So bear with us, and feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we'll go from here. Go ahead, Lloyd.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to try to share my screen and pull this up. Sharing is always a challenge for me, but maybe I'm getting better at it. Are you able to see the memo? Yes, no? Okay.
Yes, yes, I can see it.
All right, thank you. So I don't know if people have had a chance to review the memo. We did have a last moment correction to some of the earlier scoring, and we apologize to Dash and Alliance for the inaccuracies, but we got it corrected in time. And the memo, has anyone not read the memo and needs time to read it?
Well, our liaisons have obviously not seen it, so if you could just sort of provide a very basic overview of what happened and how this works and what we've come up with.
Yeah, so we it's a little larger. So we tried to provide an introduction. There's essentially several sections to the memo. First is in the introduction explaining that we had 7 organizations qualified to submit applications, and they submitted 10 applications for renewal projects and 3 for new projects. And again, for new people, the idea of renewals is that if COC funding comes to us from the federal government, from HUD each year, but if a project, the COC does have the right to what's called reallocate or take funds from one project and one organization and give it to another project and organization. But the challenge with projects then would be if we take funds from a project that is, for example, providing housing for people who had been homeless, then those households are at risk of losing their housing, or the organization and the COC needs to figure out how are we going to help these households maintain their housing, right? If projects are scoring well, they are eligible to continue to receive project funding through the COC so that they can continue to provide housing for people in the project that's receiving the funding. Let me say too, by way of introduction to COC funding, that continuum of care funding provides support for projects that are providing short to medium term rental subsidies to people who had been homeless, called rapid rehousing. It also provides funds for permanent supportive housing, which is more longer term, open-ended housing subsidies and support services funding for people who need more long-term housing assistance. And then we use a small amount of our COC funds for operating the homeless management information system, although that budget is supplemented by funds from the city of Durham as well. So it's important to understand that continuum of care funds cannot be used to help put people into emergency shelter, for example, or provide funding for street outreach activities or homeless prevention activities ordinarily. So those are some key distinctions between this source of funding and what it can be used for as compared to emergency solutions grant funds. Then the available funding section reports on, basically we have an overall total of just over $1.175 million worth of COC funding, broken down into 3 separate pots. The amount of funding for the project seeking ongoing or renewal support is $1,385,194. And then we're eligible for 2 bonus funds, a permanent housing bonus of $91,544 and a domestic violence bonus of $274,631. The COC funding priorities section reports that again, kind of some background. And the first item is to note that for the permanent housing bonus in particular, the COC or the HSAC established a priority that persons who meet the definition of an eligible dedicated plus project participant should be the priority for any permanent housing bonus in this year's competition. And in terms of the ranking, HUD requires us to rank our projects from the ones that are most essential, or the ones that we have the highest priority for funding, to those that have the least priority for funding, because HUD really wants us to pay attention to the performance of all of the projects and consider reallocating projects that are not performing up to the COC's standards. And so we can do that through reallocation, as well as HUD setting up the competition in such a way as we have to prioritize our projects. So we prioritize our HMIS project, because if we lost that COC funding, we would need to find other ways of funding our homeless management information system.
Lloyd, can you share with the committee how, how does the government decide that we're eligible for $1.3 million in funding? Can you kind of talk a little bit about how, how that number comes about?
How the annual renewal demand? Okay, yes. So the annual renewal demand, or the ARD in HUD speak, is the amount needed to renew all of the projects that are eligible for renewal funding in this year's competition. There is a footnote pointing out that one of our projects that received funding in the 2020 competition is not eligible for renewal funding because it already has grant agreements in place that will keep the project funded into calendar year 2023. So typically the projects that are eligible for renewal funding are the ones that have a grant agreement that's going to expire in the calendar year that follows the year of the competition. So our 10 projects that need renewal funding all will expire in 2022. So they need funding to go into calendar year 2023. And so the deadline for our applications, for our COC application, is November 16th. And when HUD receives it, then they need a couple months to review it and make their funding decisions and finalize the funding decisions. And then after those funding decisions are made, they work to renew the grant agreements or to put new grant agreements in place. Essentially, the grant agreements are contracts between HUD and the organizations implementing the projects. So they develop those contracts or grant agreements for the new projects, as well as renewed grant agreements for the projects that would be expiring. So the ARD looks at how much money overall is needed by the 10 COC projects that are up for renewal funding this year, and that will become clear as we go through the tables later in the memo. And then one other point again about prioritizing is that we typically prioritize our renewal projects above new projects, again with an eye to realizing that if HUD surprised us and didn't renew a renewal project, we would have to figure out how to provide for the needs of the people currently receiving assistance from that project. But we do have the opportunity, and we typically try to make decisions about reallocating existing COC renewal projects earlier in the year so that it's not a surprise. And we try to do it in consultation with the organization that is implementing the project and make a joint decision as a COC and with the organization that yes, it's time for us to reallocate this particular project. But the COC, based on performance of a project, could say that, sorry, your project just isn't performing to the standards of the COC. And so we're going to reallocate that project amount, and that would free up. We could use those funds to fund a different, a new project, for example, and have more funds available for a new project. If, for example, we took a project that maybe had $150,000 and reallocated it, then we could use those funds for a new project, either the same kind of project or a different kind of project. So table 1 shows the scores for the renewal projects that we completed over the last couple of weeks. And it shows, by way of comparison, that the scores were quite, I would say, generally improved from the scoring that we did in the spring of this year. I think there were 5 components. I'm going to review it in depth, just in the interest of time. But in terms of improvement, several things to highlight would be that prior to this evaluation, pretty consistently in the 3 or 4 evaluations that we have done over the last couple of years, our 3 rapid rehousing projects, Rapid Rehousing 1, Rapid Rehousing 3, and the Fresh Start project consistently scored towards the bottom of the 9 projects. They were not the last 3. Generally, they were in the last 4 or 5 projects. And in this evaluation, really for the first time, our rapid rehousing projects are really scattered throughout the list, with Rapid Rehousing 1 actually having the highest score of 89%, Rapid Rehousing 3 in 5th place, so right in the middle, and then Fresh Start being our final project. And Fresh Start, one of the challenges, and we all are aware of that, but I'll point it out again, particularly for newer members, one of the challenges of Fresh Start is that the target population for this rapid rehousing project is chronically homeless people. So people with longer term needs. And the idea there is that largely we don't have enough permanent supportive housing for all of the people experiencing chronic homelessness. And so Fresh Start tries to address the needs for housing of chronically homeless people with lesser needs than people that are also chronically homeless, but that would have higher needs for ongoing permanent supportive housing. So it's not surprising that they particularly under project efficiency, it takes them longer to, and they provide more support to people. So their efficiency by comparison to Rapid Rehousing 1 and Rapid Rehousing 3, it just takes more money. So they lose really about 10% of the points possible.
Lloyd, can I jump in for a moment here?
Sure.
Given the newness of many of our members, could you, just tell the group here which projects are associated with which organizations? I just don't want to assume that everybody knows, who these are.
Yeah, I have that information in table 3.
Oh, my apologies.
and we'll get to that. That's okay. No, not a problem.
And then we have a question from Shay, and
okay.
This is a general question. Can some of the funding that our COC gets go towards building supportive housing, like actually constructing it?
Yes, COC funds can be used for acquisition of properties, purchasing property to develop, housing on or property that already has housing on it. So it can be used for acquisition, rehabilitation of existing housing, and for construction of new permanent supportive housing or even project-based rapid rehousing. The challenge there is that we're not getting enough new money really in the COC competition to allow us to do a whole lot of acquisition or new construction when it costs probably $125,000 to $150,000 to build one unit of affordable housing. A $90,000 new project bonus is only going to get you part way to building one more unit. So mostly we've been using in recent years with the limits of funding, have been using it for tenant-based rent assistance because we can help more households over that time, but it is an eligible cost. So before I move on, let me simply point out again that a couple other points is that the spread of the scoring in this, if you look at the last two columns, the overall project scored much better. The lowest score was 76.2, which by comparison in the previous evaluation in the spring was at 64.5. Conversely, the highest score in the spring was 94.1, I believe. And this time the highest score was 89%. So a little more tightly packed.
And then if I could jump in again here, Lloyd, and just to remind everybody, I know this has been sort of said in other HSAC meetings, but sort of in terms of what's the baseline score, we consider a score of 70% or higher passing. So if a project score is under 70%, then we have cause for concern.
Right, and we have in the previous years, particularly in 2019, asked projects for what we call performance improvement plans, trying to get really organizations to focus on what needs to be done to improve the performance of the projects. And you can see that didn't compute here the performance, the main component, which is nearly half of the overall points available on the scorecard, are for project performance. And so that weighs heavily, but it's not the only thing we consider. We're looking at serving high need populations, project efficiency, how well projects are using the homeless management information system, as well as their housing first orientation, and looking at their policies and procedures. So with that, I'm going to move on. What else is on the agenda today, Jonathan? I think we have a report from Hanalea, right?
We do. Give me 1 second just to.
How are we doing on time?
Okay, see what we're doing here. So we do have, the only other thing is our second quarter report from Hanalea.
Okay.
I would say if we could maybe wrap up in about 15 minutes.
Okay. We'll do.
Well, 10 to 15.
Gotcha. Okay. So the new project applications, this is the committee that Jonathan and Shayna and Helen and Rita were on. They're mentioned in the memo. They evaluated 3 new project applications, permanent housing bonus submitted by the LGBTQ Center, the domestic violence bonus, also submitted by the LGBTQ Center, and Streets to Home. And this table 2 presents the scores that the projects received in this evaluation, and see that essentially the scores of the 2 applications of the LGBTQ Center were the same across the board at 90% overall, and Streets to Home, even with a 12-point bonus that was given to the LGBTQ Center for being a new organization that's not currently receiving any COC funding. Even with that, the Streets to Home project scored at 94% compared to 90% for the two projects from the LGBTQ Center. And I put in bold, or Jonathan put in bold on my draft that since this is a competition and there's not enough funding to effectively recommend both the permanent housing bonus project of the LGBTQ Center and Streets to Home 3 based on the scoring, the committee decided to recommend only the Streets to Home 3 project for funding in this year's competition. However, the good news for the LGBTQ Center is that it is the only project that applied for the domestic violence bonus. And so it is being recommended for that domestic violence bonus. And it actually has two chances to get funding, where the Streets to Home 3 project only has one chance to get funding. The LGBTQ Center DB bonus project could be funded either as a domestic violence bonus project or as a regular COC project. So that's part of the good news. So then table 3, I'm going to wrap this up, presents the ranking and the tiering positions that are being recommended for funding. And so you have the rank order in column 1, then you have the organization to come back to Jonathan's question about which organizations are represented here, and then the project name of the various projects, a project type in the whether it's a rapid rehousing project or a homeless management information system or permanent supportive housing, then the tiering and the ranking, the amount of funding that's being requested for the project, and then a running total in the last column, which tier 1 again is the total of our annual renewal demand, and then the two bonus, or the two new or bonus projects would be in tier 2, although we're hopeful that both of them will be funded in this year's competition. And though it's in 12th place on this table, I think since the domestic violence bonus is a separate competition, probably I wouldn't be surprised that the domestic violence bonus is funded and Streets to Home 3 is not funded, although we're hopeful and optimistic that Streets to Home 3 also will be funded. That's the overview. On my clock, there's 8 more minutes before 11 a.m.
Well, let me.
Any questions?
Yeah, open up for questions here.
May I ask a question?
You may.
Thank you. You know it's going to be hard for me, right? So what is the likelihood, Lloyd, if you were to take just a wild guess of tier 2 projects being funded? Because historically, you know, it's usually tier 1 or bust.
Well, we're optimistic this year for a number of reasons. One is that HUD has a bit more money as a result of, I think, of some of the pandemic-related funding that Congress has approved. So for the first time, I think since probably in the last 6 or longer years, tier 1 is all of our annual renewal demand. In recent years, annual renewal demand or tier 1 funding has been 94%, maybe 90%, 96% of annual renewal demand. We have, while we've not gotten new projects, I don't believe any of the renewal funding that was placed at the top of tier 2 for a renewal project was not funded. I think we were able to get all of our renewals funded to their full amount over the last several years, but we were not able to get a new project. But insofar as HUD has a bit more money and tier 1 includes all of the total amount needed to renew all of our renewal projects, we're optimistic that there'll be enough money to fund at least one new project for Durham. And we're hoping as well that we're hopeful because we think we're going to have a strong collaborative application, which also contributes to our hopefulness and optimism about getting a new project funded through the permanent housing bonus. And we're hopeful that we did get a domestic violence bonus project funded in 2018. And as noted in the footnote, that will be eligible for a bonus next year. And HUD has $102 million, I believe, nationwide for the domestic violence bonus this year. And we're hopeful that the LGBTQ Center's domestic violence bonus will also be funded as a DV bonus project.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
You may indeed.
Thank you. So Lloyd, you mentioned at the top that DCRC's rapid rehousing project was not eligible for the competition because their funding goes through 2023. Is that correct?
Yeah, into the mid 2023.
So with these projects being approved through 2023, if everyone gets funded, right? How
Right.
does that then impact the annual renewal demand? Like, are we getting to a threshold where it's possible some of the renewal projects might have to move to tier 2? Do you follow what I'm saying?
Well, I believe so. Again, depending where HUD sets the threshold of how much funding is in tier 1, there may be a need for a portion or a renewal project to be placed in tier 2. But our annual renewal demand next year will include, assuming all of these renewals get funded, would include all of those projects plus hopefully Streets to Home 3 and DV bonus as well. And then in addition to that would be the renewal of the DCRC project as well. So potentially our annual renewal demand, if all of these projects are funded this year, we'd have 1.751 million plus the DV or the DCRC project, which I think is in the neighborhood of 170,000. So would be probably over 1.9 million. With increases in fair market rent allowances approaching the $2 million mark.
Any other questions?
I had a quick question. And it may have been similar to Ricky's question. Was the LGBTQ Center, did they apply last year, or was this their first time applying for CSC funds?
It
This
was
is their first.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Casey.
Sorry, Lloyd. Yes, it was our first time.
Right. And you'll recall that in 2020, due to the pandemic, we did not have a formal competition. HUD chose to simply renew all of our existing renewal projects.
Okay,
So really
all right, thank
the
you.
last formal competition we had was in 2019. Good question.
Right. Well, we do need to take a vote on this to adopt it to present to the larger HSAC. However, I am actually unaware of how many people can actually vote on this. We have, I think, a number of folks in here with with conflicts of interest. So if your organization is up for funding here, or if you sit on a board, unfortunately, you cannot vote. So I believe that leaves me Shay, Angel, and let's see. And then I think some of our new, I know some of our new folks may or may not have conflicts of interest. I'm going to ask the group, do we feel, I realize that, this, very short notice here, do we feel ready to vote on this for those who are able to vote, who don't have conflicts of interest?
I'm okay to vote on it.
Yeah. And I'm primarily asking for our new folks here. This is, didn't have the benefit of seeing this ahead of time and just getting the presentation. Okay.
I guess I'll quickly ask, I'm new and I'm with Families Moving Forward, and I know we're not up for funding here, but I know that we do work with Housing for New Hope and Urban Ministries quite often. Is that a conflict of interest that would make me ineligible to vote? Or I just want to make sure, because I'm not quite sure what constitutes conflict.
So if you work for an agency that is up for funding, or if you sit on the board of an agency that's up for funding, to my understanding, being a partner agency with one of these other agencies and does not make it a conflict of interest, to my understanding. Does anybody, Lloyd or Hanalea, am I right about that, or Ruby?
You are correct, yes.
Okay.
And they need to state during the vote that they're conflicting themselves out, so that that's recorded in the minute.
Okay. All right. So, okay. So at this point, is there anybody? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a chat vote. Assuming we can get a motion in a second. So there are obviously folks who can vote and folks who have conflicts of interest. So whatever your situation is, if you are able to, vote yes or no, please vote that in the chat box. If you have to abstain, then please also vote abstain. Our new COC liaisons, you are voting members, just like any HSAC member on this committee is. You just, like any of us, if you have a conflict of interest, you just have to abstain. So if I could get a motion from the floor, if someone would make a motion to adopt this. Or if, if we're not ready to vote on this, we can also do an email vote to give folks more time.
Keep in mind,
Is
this
there
isn't
anyone on the call who doesn't receive or is on a board of one of the agencies? I think that might only be Brady.
Brady and myself and Angel
Shay.
and Shay, and Angel was on here as well. So unfortunately, Chris can't be with us this morning. And then we do have two other folks who are not with us as well. Alicia is a voting member of HSAC. She doesn't have a conflict of interest, but she's not here. So there's
This is looking like an email. This is looking like an email vote.
Okay. All right. Go ahead,
Jonathan,
Colin.
I was going to say, if we've got enough people to try and do it with an email vote, let's try that.
Okay.
A plan B, because ultimately the HSAC has to also approve this formally at the October meeting.
Yeah.
If the committee is unable to have enough members to do it without everybody having a conflict, we could just say, this is being moved from this committee to the HSAC for approval. Because they're the ones who ultimately have to make the final approval. You're just making the recommendation that these scores are okay and the rankings are fine. You're making the recommendation to it. We could just take it to the full HSAC if as a plan B.
Yeah, that we can certainly do that. Okay, so what I will do then is in our HSAC meeting, I believe is next Wednesday, right? Or is it the following Wednesday? Let me check the calendar.
The following Wednesday.
Okay. Oh, good. We have lots of time. Okay. All right. So as you can see, to our new members here, you can see how it gets a little lean around scoring time in terms of folks who can score and actually vote on the recommendation. So what I will do is I will send out this memo and I will call for a vote, and we'll have folks reply to that. I like that idea as well because, you know, obviously at least four of you all, you know, are just seeing this for the first time. And, you know, I always like the opportunity for people to be able to spend time with the document. So hopefully, you know, for our new folks, this was a good introduction to some of the evaluating process. We'll send out an email vote and we'll go from there. Any other questions or concerns about this at this time? All right. All right, well, we'll move on to our last piece here. So, you know, as I mentioned kind of earlier, you know, one of the things that we do is just sort of, you know, review and talk about, you know, concerns that come up, you know, among our projects that affect performance. And so how we do that is we do these occasional quarterly reports, and Hanalea Hoberman is oftentimes the community staff member who will do that. And she will pull a report from HMIS, and then we kind of look at some of the trends that she's seeing in the data for how things are going and kind of, you know, ask good questions about it. So Hanalea, you have lots of time. You have a good 20 minutes if you'd like.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. So for those who are new to this, I do a comprehensive report on a quarterly basis that pulls a ton of data out of the system about our performance, and specifically our performance as it relates to coordinated entry on multiple levels. I sent y'all that report this morning. That's really for folks who really love digging into the details of the data. I do a much more overview presentation of this, just some key points on a quarterly basis, but you're always welcome to dig into that report if you'd like, and can always send me questions or ask me questions. I was not able to present the Q4 report for 2021 because I was sick. So this is actually going to be 2 quarterly reports combined. So this will be Q4 from 2021 and then the first quarter from 21-22 together. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so the first key metric that I pulled out for y'all to look at is the percent of client intakes at the front door of the system. So that's clients who come through entry point or one of the coordinated entry hubs for an initial intake seeking homeless services, who are diverted out of the homeless system without needing to enter emergency shelter. So this incorporates in historic data going back to when we first started doing universal diversion in our system. And as you can see, our performance here is very good. The performance has fluctuated a bit from Q4 to Q1, but overall the data looks very good. The overall trend is that we're sustaining the gains that we made in the 2021 year. We are surpassing the national standards for diversion, which are 15% for singles and 30% for families. So as you can see, although our diversions did drop a bit in the last quarter, which I think is probably due to the end of the eviction moratorium. We continue to see very high diversion rates in the high 30s for families and in the 20% range for singles. So continue to be very happy with this metric. Any questions about our diversion rate?
Yes, so if you could just tell us what the different colored lines are.
Sure, yeah. And hopefully y'all can see down at the bottom the key. So the blue diversion is our diversions overall. And then I split them out by families and singles, since we have kind of different standards for families and singles. So the red line is diversion specifically for families, and the yellow line is diversion specifically for singles.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Go for it.
Q1 is July, August, September?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
So it looks like we're having a greater success rate at diverting our families from entering the system as opposed to our singles?
Yeah, that's right. And that's consistent with what we know about diversion nationally. Again, so the diversion rate nationally expected is 30% for families and 15% for singles. So generally, it's understood that singles are much harder to divert than families are, because in general, fewer people are willing to help out singles, whereas people tend to have a lot of compassion for children. And so family members will step in and things like that. So we consider a 20% diversion rate for singles to be very good.
And could you, and just because I just don't want to assume anything today, given the newness of some of our folks, could you just talk about what some of those diversion interventions might be?
Yeah, so a diversion plan might be reunifying with a family member who is willing to let a client or household stay with them, or maybe they were already staying with them, but we're able to prolong that so that that'll be longer term. Could be helping prevent someone from losing their housing through eviction, or could be helping them move into a new unit through helping them pay first month's rent and security deposit. Could be helping them with transportation to a destination where they maybe have some more family or friend support, things like that.
And then I think, Lloyd, are you raising your hand? Or did you hit your button by accident?
Yes, no, I was raising my hand and I'll
Okay.
lower it. Wanted to ask, and maybe it's coming up on another slide, Hanalei, if you would have any numbers of what these percentages represent, particularly for families and singles?
I do, yes, and that's in the full report that I sent out this morning. If you want me to get those, give me 1 second and I can pull them, but I just have to stop sharing.
Okay, and then we've got a question from Angel also about, will this information change due to the numbers of individuals facing homelessness due to the ERAP?
I'm going to answer the first question about numbers. So for those, like I said, who are really interested in digging into the data, this report is available in your email. So in the first quarter of the 2022 fiscal year, we had 607 intakes, and out of those, 152 of those intakes resulted in diversion. We had 128 family intakes, and 47 of those were diverted, and then we had 455 singles intakes, and 94 of those were diverted. The second question, the answer is I don't know. It is possible that we are going to see uptick in intakes as a result of eviction. Again, we did see a drop in diversion rates in this Q1 year. As you can see, we had a 22% rate for singles that dropped to a 21% in the next quarter. Our 44% rate for families dropped to 37. So we do see a trend. I do suspect this is because of the end of the eviction moratorium. What role the pause of ERAP is going to play is hard to say, because we also have prevention funds coming on. So hopefully people who need funds and are at risk of entering the homeless system will still be able to access funds. So I think probably the eviction moratorium end will probably have more of an impact than the ERAP funds ending, just because that small portion of the ERAP population that would enter the homeless system will probably be able to get their funds from us elsewhere, and hopefully that won't have too much of an impact, but only time will tell. All right, well, if there are no other questions on diversion, we can move on to the next slide. So one of our goals of the front end of our coordinated entry system is to increase the access of vulnerable clients to our shelter system. And on that metric, again, we are doing very well. Very pleased with what we've seen over the last year or so. And in this first quarter, we see that the numbers are sustaining. So one of the ways that we measure the vulnerability of clients entering shelter is the percent of those who entered shelter who have disabilities. And on here, you see the red line is singles entering shelter, and the yellow line is adults entering family shelter with disabilities. So we saw major gains in the percent of those with disabilities entering over the last year, going from Q1, we were at a rate of about 20% for adults in family shelter, and in the high 50% for singles, and that was already represented a gain in singles from the previous year, where we were in the kind of mid 50% range, all the way to our last quarter of last fiscal year, where we were at 70% for singles and upwards of near 40% for families. And what we see in this first quarter of 21-22 is that we're not continuing to rise. I mean, there's going to be a cap on that, right? It's going to plateau at some point, and that is what's happened, but we seem to be sustaining those gains, which is really good news. There is the possibility that that these numbers will drop when CDI closes. But I think the fact that we've also seen gains on the family side is good news, which to me indicates, because family shelter composition has not changed, that these may be some longer term improvements, just as a result of the program aging and really coming into their own and getting better at engaging those vulnerable clients, along with bringing on street outreach and the hospital hub through Project Access to really help us get those vulnerable clients into the system, that hopefully these gains will be sustained even when we move on from this COVID period. Any questions about this? All right. So this is the other way that we measure vulnerability of the clients entering shelter. So this is the percent of shelter clients that were vulnerable, that were unsheltered before they entered shelter. And so for this, we saw a bit more of a drop in this quarter as compared to Q4. However, this is still much higher than we were at in 2019, 2020. So probably just some quarter to quarter variability, but something to watch. So in the fourth quarter, singles who were unsheltered at entry, which are represented on this brown line here, they were a little above, they were kind of in the high 50% range for singles were unsheltered at entry. And then for families, which has always been much lower of families that are unsheltered, just because there are fewer unsheltered families, is around 25%. And then in the first quarter of 21-22, it dropped down to the kind of lower 50 range for singles and around 20% for families. But again, this is still much higher than we saw pre the implementation of the system. And so we're still pretty happy with these numbers. Any questions about this? All right. Moving on. So the next major metric that I pull out for y'all is about the percent of those served in the COC. So this is the entire homeless system, including permanent housing, that exit to permanent housing. And of course, this is our goal, right? That we help people move from homelessness to permanent housing. So this is really important. Here, the results are more challenging, I will say. This is an area where we are struggling. However, there is some reason to be optimistic. So basically what we saw over, so I should say the black line here is permanent housing exits for families. The red line is permanent housing exits overall. And then the yellow line is permanent housing for exits for singles. So essentially what we saw over the last year was we saw this kind of drop. It was a massive drop in the second quarter of last year for families and a small one for singles as a result of a major shift that we made in our coordinated entry system. And it was like this seismic shift and everything sort of ground to a halt as we turned the ship. And then when we saw sort of slow gains on that over the course of the year. And then what was concerning is that in Q4, as you can see, the numbers drop again. And so that's concerning, right? We were kind of like slowly returning, making our gains, and then the numbers dropped. However, some reasons to be optimistic is that we do see an improvement in this first quarter. So hopefully that drop was temporary, and we are starting to, get back on our trend of improving. But this is an area where we really need to continue working. I think we're hopeful that the new coordinated entry prioritization process that I'll be presenting on in the next HSAC meeting for those who have not had an opportunity to be exposed to it, but we're hopeful that that's going to help us with this, but it is an area of concern for sure. Any questions about this?
It's not so much a question as it is a comment, if I'm allowed.
Sure.
So I think, what may be, interesting here and kind of related to one of your previous slides, Hanalea, is, the eviction moratorium did, I think, put a strain on the system with there being available units to exit people to. So if there could be like an asterisk somewhere, that's where I would put it.
And it's not just that it put a strain in terms of availability of units, but it also made our landlords a lot more risk averse to take our clients because they knew that once they took them, that was pretty much it. So we have seen an uptick in some of our like longstanding landlords being more willing to work with us again. Of course, it's a bittersweet because we know that that's because other people are being put out of their housing. But at the end of the day, it probably is a good thing for the homeless system because we are seeing improvements in the speed at which we're able to get people into housing. And I do think that's going to bear out in the numbers.
May I ask another question before you move on?
Sure.
Is there any correlation between seeing more people with disabilities entering shelter? I think it was like your third slide, I can't remember. But the increase with those types of challenges in the emergency shelter system, increasing length of stay? Where's that coming up? Am I jumping the gun?
I haven't looked at, I haven't pulled it into a system and really looked at like statistical variation, but I don't know that it would be very meaningful because it would still correlate with time, right? However, logically, I think that we can say that as we serve more vulnerable clients in shelter, that's one of the reasons that we have struggled, right? Is that when you take a client in shelter, and more than the client with disabilities, but it's those clients who were not unsheltered when they came in, right? If a client was housed before they came in, it's going to be a lot less hard to get them back into housing, right? Because those were people, frankly, who probably should have never entered the homeless system, right? Who we should have diverted out. And so as we divert more households and get kind of like, we sift out everyone who really should never enter shelter in the first place and really filter it down to those clients who really have no other option. Yeah, it's going to be harder to house those clients, and there's going to be, there's going to be less self-resolving, and it's going to be more on us to really be creative with our interventions. It's hard to know exactly what portion of that this is responsible for, but I do think that, yes, it's reasonable to believe that that is having some impact.
Okay, thank you.
So Hanalea, I have a question. I've been off circuit for a minute. I'm trying to catch up here. So the data that you're stating and submitting to everyone, how does that coincide with what's going on now with the moratorium ended, ERAP on a quick little break right now, and families for last week, this week, like 75 on Monday, 60 something on Wednesday that have been getting evicted. So where is the priority and stuff at? Or am I confusing the two?
No, I mean, so this metric in particular, this is people who are already in the homeless system who are exiting out of permanent housing. So, the way in which the eviction moratorium affects the homeless system, again, is probably more in the way it affected our pipeline out. Again, we saw that landlords were much more reluctant to take our clients because they knew they could take them. And as Ricky mentioned, there was just fewer churn of a vacant housing unit. So actually, again, I don't want anyone to misinterpret me in thinking that the eviction moratorium ending is a good thing. It isn't for our community as a whole, but the homeless system that is just a small microcosm of housing instability, it did have a negative impact on the homeless system. And we do think the homeless system will benefit from the end. Again, highlighting that homelessness is just, the tip of the iceberg in housing instability. And we know that, there's a lot of people who will be housing unstable as a result of the eviction moratorium ending, but those people won't necessarily all enter the homeless system.
A nice majority of them will, though, because landlords are not taking the money, and it's a mess. I'm just looking to see how the coming months are going to help, as it did try to help last year's homelessness.
Yeah, so what the data shows, I believe, Lloyd, jump in, is it 30% of or 25% of families that are evicted will enter the homeless system? What do you remember that metric?
Sorry, I don't remember the specific metric, but I think the national data is that it's very low.
Yeah, it's a minority, but
Yeah,
we're not exactly sure.
There's not a strong correlation between being evicted and becoming homeless.
But I do want to just keep going because I'm aware that I'm running out of time. And
yeah, friends, I was going to say we need to wrap up here in the next few minutes, just because we want to make sure we try to start and end on time as much as possible.
Yeah, so the last metric that I've pulled for y'all is about the number of placements in our two main permanent housing programs, which is permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. We're happy to say that rapid rehousing numbers are rebounding and have, for the first time in the first quarter of 21-22, returned to pre-COVID levels. So that is very, very good news, because those permanent housing exit numbers that we saw a second ago have really suffered from the fact that we were not doing nearly enough rapid rehousing placements. That being said, in order for us to really start to make gains on those numbers, this needs to continue growing. So if we see this continued trend next year, that it'll continue to go up, we'll be in very, very good shape. If this plateaus out, or hopefully not, but drops, it will be an area of concern, because we really need to get above those pre-COVID levels to make gains. you know, we have a whole lot more money in our system than we did before. So we really should be housing more people, not just the same number. But it's good news that since that, again, you see that massive drop in Q2 as we turn the ship, and then we've made gains quarter over quarter, and then we saw this massive one in Q1, which hopefully means we're really embracing the new system and really getting a hang of it. PSH numbers continue to be very low. We have had some challenges with turnover in our project-based PSH as a result of the difficulty of getting people to come work on units that need repairs. That's been a big challenge. And then just also the challenge of trying to find housing for people with vouchers who are trying to move on. So we have not had as many PSH placements as we'd hoped. However, I will say on the horizon of Q2, I think we will have more permanent supporters of housing placements. Some of the work we did is finally starting to bear out, and we're getting some new vacancies in PSH. So hopefully some good news on the horizon, but there's only so much we can do with PSH placements.
All right. Is that your last slide, Hanalea?
That is.
It is. Okay. Any last questions for Hanalea?
This is Tracy. I was thinking about this and didn't know whether or not this is an HSAC kind of discussion or if it's even on the next coming agenda for HSAC. However, given the comment that Angel was talking about, we also, Alliance was talking about the recent article in the News and Observer regarding the landlord in Durham who refused to accept the federal funds under the CARES Act. And I'm wondering, how is that impacting some of the families that will possibly face eviction, if not some housing barriers they move forward? Because at this point, I mean, he's one of many, but he kind of has a niche in the housing market in Durham. And that's usually those individuals who are very low income or needing at that 30% AMI. So I'm just wondering whether or not internally has the city of Durham discussed this and devised maybe a strategy or plan of action to address it.
So I'll say that's really beyond the purview of my work on coordinated entry. So happy to let other people weigh in on that. But I would say that is probably outside of my area.
Well, that may be a good question to bring up in the overall, in the larger HSAC meeting. Because certainly we already have a supply crunch of housing. Yeah, I guess Lloyd or Colin, I mean, do you know of anything that's might have been discussed that you could share with us? You know,
I am not aware of anything.
okay.
I didn't see the article.
So I'll tell folks, I know we've got to wrap up. I have actually a veteran client right now who's in this situation where he lost his job last year during COVID, and I guess the landlord is refusing to take the ERAP funds because otherwise it could be done. So I candidly don't know what else to be done about that. I know Janine is part of this committee and she works with ERAP.
If you've got a client that you're working with, Jonathan, and he's somebody you're working with or your team's working with, we just had a case where a landlord was refusing to accept ERAP funds, and one of the prevention providers got involved and basically called the landlord and said, hey, if you'll accept the ERAP funds, we'll work with this client moving forward through the homeless prevention program to help the person try and get stable and stay on top of making payments. So you won't have to go through this again. That may be an option for you to sort of reach out to the landlord on behalf of the client and say, hey, let's tag team this, take the ERAP funds if you can, and we'll be working with them to step in and cover rent if needed, or help with the budgeting process to make sure it doesn't fall backwards, or even file for future ERAP funds if needed. It seems like that worked out, at least in the case that came to my attention yesterday.
Okay.
And I realize we're running out of time and we're over time. I'll be happy to forward the link to the article that I received. But it has caused some concern for us simply because we know we typically work with individuals who have limited income means, and we know this will impact 60+ families, not to mention, households that have children involved. So it is definitely a concern that we're discussing internally.
Is that the article, Tracy, about Rick Souls?
Correct.
Okay, so that article, I know there's a lot of discussion about that going on in the background. And that's all I'm going to say at this point is there's a lot of conversations of trying to figure out how to bridge that and figure out how to, what needs to happen. There's some conversation on it, but in the meantime, the best thing I think is, if you've got a client who is caught up in that, reach out to the landlord with the client on behalf of the client and explain you're working with them. And it sounds like, that may be enough to push him over the edge to say, sure, we'll make it work. So that may be an option.
Okay. All right. Well, it really is something that's bubbling underneath the surface, along with so many other things that are bubbling up around housing issues in and around in the triangle. So I didn't know whether or not the city was trying to deal with it behind the scenes. That's why I didn't really mention that particular landlord by name, but didn't know whether or not you all were working to kind of, strategize.
We are talking about it and working on it.
All right, we are 6 minutes over. If somebody could just make a motion to adjourn, followed by a second, we'll go ahead and adjourn. We can certainly, I suspect this will probably be the last time we discuss that. We can certainly revisit that at a later date.
So moved.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ricky. Second.
I second.
Okay. So this is unprecedented. Dr. Birch has made a motion and seconded. Unfortunately, did not accept the second. So someone else still on here would kindly offer a second.
I motion, Ricky second.
I did.
Well, Ricky, technically you're an observer, so you can't.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, Ricky, you can't say.
I second.
All right, there we go.
You go.
Thank you, Shay.
Kennard.
Thank you, Shay. All right, so we are adjourned. Thank you to everybody. Thank you for the humor to end our meeting today. Humor is always good. And have a wonderful day. We'll see you all. Well, you'll get an email from me about the vote, and we'll see you all in HSAC.
Take care.
All right. Have a good day.
Thanks, Dr. Birch.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.